My name's Cindy, I'm 28 years old, and if there's one thing life has taught me, it's that family isn't always the safety net people pretend it is. Sometimes, the very people you think will catch you are the ones who let you fall the hardest. I learned that lesson at 22, standing in the middle of my tiny one-bedroom apartment in Indianapolis, staring at a refrigerator that held nothing but half a jar of peanut butter and a carton of expired milk. Back then, I was broke. Not skip a coffee, broke, but do I pay rent or do I eat this week, broke. I had just started a job at a local bookstore, making barely above minimum wage, and every single dollar had to stretch until it snapped. I remember the humiliation of counting coins at the checkout line, my face burning when the cashier sighed and rolled her eyes. That's when I thought of my older brother, Mark. He was 3 years older than me, and in my head, he was the responsible one, the one with a steady job in IT, the guy who always bragged at family dinners about his 401k and his new car. I hated the idea of asking him for help, but that night, staring at my empty fridge, I swallowed my pride. I called him, voice shaking, and explained my situation. I didn't ask for much. Just some help with groceries, maybe $40 to get me through the week. I remember the silence on the other end of the line, followed by this low chuckle. And then his words. Cindy, you need to learn to manage money better. I'm not just going to bail you out every time you screw up. Every time. As if I'd ever asked him for a single dime before. I hung up the phone that night, cheeks burning with shame. But underneath the shame, something else had started to build, something I didn't recognize at first. It was anger. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something that looked a lot like revenge. After that call with Mark, I cried myself to sleep. But the next morning, when the sun came through the blinds of my crappy little apartment, I felt different. Something inside me had hardened. If he wasn't going to help me, if no one was going to help me, then I'd figure it out on my own. And I swore to myself right then that I would never forget the sound of his laugh when he told me to manage my money better. The weeks that followed were brutal. I worked double shifts at the bookstore, and when that wasn't enough, I picked up side jobs, babysitting, cleaning houses, even delivering pizzas in my old beat-up Honda. My body ached constantly, but my fridge slowly started to fill. I remember the pride I felt the first time I bought a week's worth of groceries without having to check my balance at the register. It wasn't much, but it was mine. By the time I turned 25, things were changing. I had clawed my way into a new job at a logistics company, starting at the bottom as an assistant. The pay wasn't great at first, but I treated every dollar like it was sacred. I made budgets, tracked my spending, and slowly started to build a savings account. And all the while, I watched Mark from a distance. On Facebook, he kept up his perfect image, pictures of him at breweries with his friends, vacations to Florida, new electronics. At family gatherings, he always had some comment about how people just needed to be smarter with money whenever anyone mentioned struggling. He'd say it with this smug little smirk, the same one I remembered from that phone call. I'd smile politely, but inside, I was still replaying that night when I asked him for help and he laughed. By 27, I had moved into a better apartment, one with actual space and a kitchen I could be proud of. I had a reliable car, a growing emergency fund, and for the first time in my life, a sense of stability. I felt strong, stronger than I ever thought I could. And that's when everything started to change for Mark. It started subtly, the kind of thing you'd almost miss if you weren't paying attention. Mark had always been the golden boy of the family, steady job, nice apartment, shiny car. But one Thanksgiving, when he showed up at my mom's house, I noticed the difference. He was quieter than usual, his shirt a little more wrinkled, his eyes tired. At dinner, he didn't brag about work the way he usually did. Normally, he'd dominate conversations with stories about office projects and how valuable he was to the company. This time, when someone asked how things were going at his firm, he shrugged and muttered, "It's fine." That was it. No long speech, no condescending financial advice. Just fine. I knew something was off. A couple of months later, I found out through my mom. She called me one night, her voice hushed like she was delivering bad news. "Cindy, don't tell Mark I told you this, but he lost his job. Apparently, there had been some restructuring at his company. His department was downsized, and he was one of the first to go. All that job security he used to lord over everyone else, gone in an instant." At first, I felt a flicker of sympathy. I wouldn't wish unemployment on anyone, not even him. But then I remembered that night years ago, when my fridge was empty and my pride was shattered, and the sympathy faded. Instead, there was something else in its place. Something colder. The weeks turned into months, and I watched from the sidelines as Mark started to unravel. His Facebook posts became less about vacations and more about vague complaints. He sold his expensive watch. Then his car. At family gatherings, he looked restless, picking at his plate while the rest of us talked. For the first time, he didn't look like the man with all the answers. He looked lost. And then one evening, my phone lit up with his name. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. I hadn't heard his voice in months, and I knew exactly why he was calling. The same brother who once laughed when I asked for help was now reaching out to me. When his name flashed across my phone screen, my first instinct was to let it ring out. Part of me wanted to sit back, arms folded, and imagine the look on his face when he realized I wasn't going to answer. But curiosity got the better of me. After the third ring, I swiped to accept. "Hello?" I said, my voice carefully neutral. There was a pause on the other end, then a sigh. "Hey, Cindy. It's me." I leaned against my kitchen counter, staring at the neatly stocked fridge behind me. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Yeah, I can see that, Mark. What's up?" His voice was low, stripped of the arrogance I had always associated with him. "Listen, I wouldn't be calling if it wasn't serious. Things have been hard lately. I lost my job a few months back. Money's tight. Really tight." He cleared his throat. "I was wondering if you could help me out a little. Just until I get back on my feet." I let the silence stretch, savoring the shift in power. Years ago, when I had asked him for a fraction of what he was asking now, he laughed at me. Now here he was, practically begging. "How much are we talking about?" I finally asked. "Maybe a couple hundred? Just to cover groceries and bills this month. I'll pay you back, I promise." His voice cracked slightly at the word promise. I could almost picture him, sitting in his bare apartment, pride swallowed, dialing me as a last resort. And it felt good. Not in a cruel way, but in a way that made all those years of struggle feel vindicated. "I see," I said slowly. "You know, Mark. I remember a time when I called you for help with groceries. Do you remember what you told me?" There was another long pause. "Cindy, don't do this," he muttered. "Oh, I remember it word for word," I continued, my tone sharp now. "You told me to learn to manage money better. Does that sound familiar?" His silence was all the confirmation I needed. The silence on the other end of the line stretched on, heavy and uncomfortable. I could almost hear the memory replaying in his head, just as it had replayed in mine for years. That smug laugh. That dismissive tone. The way he made me feel small when I was already at rock bottom. Finally, he broke the silence. "Cindy. I was an ass back then. I know it. I shouldn't have said that to you. I'm sorry, okay? But I really need your help right now." His voice cracked again, and I could hear the desperation. For a second, I almost caved. The younger version of me, the one who always wanted her big brother's approval, wanted to rush in, write him a check, and let the past be the past. But the woman I had become? She remembered everything. And she wasn't going to let him off that easily. "I'll think about it," I said finally, my tone calm but deliberate. "I'll call you back." And then I hung up before he could reply. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. My mind wasn't just on Mark's request, it was on the years between then and now. I thought about the nights I worked double shifts, the times I sat in my car crying because I didn't know how I'd make rent, the humiliation of scraping together coins for groceries. And I thought about how Mark, with all his stability and comfort, couldn't spare $40 for his little sister. Helping him outright would have been too easy. He would take my money, mumble a thank you, and probably never think twice about how he treated me. But I wanted him to feel it. To understand the pain he had dismissed so casually years ago. That's when I decided, I wasn't just going to help him. I was going to teach him. The same way life had taught me, the hard way. The first step was patience. I wasn't going to say yes immediately. No, I would let him sweat, let him wonder if I would turn my back the way he had turned his back on me. And when I finally did help, it would be on my terms, not his. I smiled to myself as the plan started to take shape. For the first time in a long while, I felt completely in control. The next few days were almost amusing, if I'm being honest. Mark called me twice more and texted 4 times, each message a little more desperate than the last. Hey, just checking in, did you think about it? Cindy, I really need to know soon, bills are stacking up. I wouldn't be asking if it wasn't serious. Please. Each ping of my phone gave me the same little rush of satisfaction. Years ago, I had been the one waiting for his mercy, heart racing every time my phone stayed silent. Now the roles were reversed, and I let him sit in that uncertainty. When I finally answered his call 3 days later, I kept my voice calm, almost detached. I've been thinking, I said. On the other end, his relief was audible. Thank God. So, can you? I'm not sure yet, I interrupted smoothly. I need to understand what I'd even be getting into. You asked me for money, Mark, but what's the actual situation? How much debt are you in? How behind are you on bills? There was a pause, then a heavy sigh. I'm about 2 months behind on rent. Credit cards are maxed out. I had to sell my car just to cover last month's utilities. It's bad, Cindy. Really bad. I let that sink in, not for him, but for me. The mighty had fallen. The man who once lorded his financial wisdom over everyone now couldn't keep his lights on. I see, I said, my tone even. That's a lot, Mark. And to be honest, it makes me wonder, what happened to all that advice you used to give at family dinners? About how people just needed to make smarter choices. His voice dropped. I know. I was a jerk. You don't have to remind me. Oh, I do, I thought, though I didn't say it. Instead, I told him, I'll think about what I can do. But don't expect an answer right away. I need time. And I hung up again. This time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt power. The same power he once had over me. And I wasn't done yet. It was about a week later when I finally called Mark back. By then, he'd left 2 more voicemails, one clipped and frustrated, the other almost pleading. I could hear the crack in his voice, the exhaustion that comes from carrying too much shame and too many bills at once. I let him stew just long enough before deciding it was time to move to the next stage. When he picked up, his tone was rushed, desperate. Cindy. Finally. I wasn't sure if you were ever gonna call back. Did you think about what I asked? I leaned back in my chair, deliberately calm. I did. And I'm willing to help. But it's not going to be the way you think. He was quiet for a beat. What do you mean? I'm not just handing you cash, Mark. That's not happening. If I'm going to help, it's going to be on my terms. And it's going to come with conditions. The pause on the line stretched, and then he said, slowly, what kind of conditions? I smiled to myself. For starters, you'll need to sit down with me and show me your budget, or what's left of it. Every bill, every expense, every debt. No hiding, no excuses. You once told me I needed to learn to manage money better. Well, now it's your turn to actually prove you can. He groaned, the sound of his pride cracking. Cindy, come on. No, I cut in sharply. This isn't negotiable. If you want my help, you'll have to swallow your pride and accept that it's my way. Otherwise, you can figure it out on your own. For a moment, I thought he might hang up. But then he let out a long breath and muttered, "Fine. If that's what it takes." "Good," I said, my voice steady. "Bring everything to my place this weekend. We'll go through it together." When I hung up, I sat there smiling, a slow, satisfied grin spreading across my face. Years ago, I had been the one humiliated, the one begging for scraps of help. Now it was his turn to sit in that chair. And I intended to make sure he felt every ounce of it. Saturday afternoon, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Mark stood there with a manila folder in his hands, his shoulders slumped like the weight of the world was pressing down on him. He didn't look like the older brother I remembered, the one who always carried himself with smug confidence. This version of him looked small. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. He walked past me into the kitchen, setting the folder on the table. I noticed his clothes right away, not the crisp button-downs he used to wear, but a faded t-shirt and jeans that looked like they'd seen better days. His hair was a little unkempt, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "Sit," I told him, motioning toward the chair. He obeyed without a word. I took a seat across from him and slid the folder closer. "Let's see what we're dealing with." Inside were a mess of papers, overdue notices, credit card statements, utility bills, even a past due notice from his landlord. I flipped through each one slowly, deliberately, while he shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "2 maxed out credit cards, both over $3,000, I said, scanning. "Rent 2 months late. Car loan settled but at a loss. And you're behind on utilities too." "Wow, Mark." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah. It got out of control faster than I thought." I looked up at him, holding back the smirk tugging at my lips. "You know, I seem to remember you telling me once that people just need to make smarter choices. So, were these smart choices?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He just stared at the table. I leaned back in my chair. "Here's how this is going to work. I'm not giving you cash. I'll cover your groceries for the month, but you'll have to come shopping with me, stick to a list, and learn how to actually stretch a dollar. And if you want me to help with bills, you're going to sit down with me every week and go over your budget until you figure out how to manage your own money." He looked up, his pride fighting his desperation. "You're really gonna make me do this?" "Yes," I said firmly. "Because this is what you made me do, except I had to figure it out alone. Now you get to learn, with me watching every step of the way." For the first time in years, I saw something new in his eyes. Not arrogance. Not dismissal. But respect, and maybe even fear. And I wasn't done teaching him yet. The following Saturday, Mark pulled up outside my apartment in his old beat-up sedan. I almost laughed. This was the same guy who used to brag about his shiny new car every time we got together. Now he was driving something that looked like it had survived a demolition derby. "Ready?" I asked when he came in. He nodded, clearly not eager, and followed me back out as I grabbed my shopping list. At the store, I could see the tension in his posture. He hated being there with me, hated the idea of being told what to do. But I had made the rules clear. If he wanted groceries, he'd come with me and learn how to budget for them. We started in the produce section. I picked up a bag of apples. "These are cheaper by the pound if you buy the bag instead of loose." "Put it in the cart." He obeyed silently. Next, I led him to the meat aisle. He reached for a pack of steaks, the expensive cut he probably used to buy without thinking. "Nope," I said sharply, shaking my head. "That's not how this works. Ground beef, chicken thighs, beans. Stretchable proteins. We're not shopping like you're still on a 6-figure salary." He hesitated, then slowly set the steaks back and grabbed the chicken thighs. I could see the humiliation all over his face. By the time we got to the dairy aisle, I almost felt bad. Almost. He reached for a brand-name carton of milk, and I stopped him again. Generic is 50 cents cheaper. It's the same thing. Trust me. He sighed, his cheeks pink with embarrassment, but switched them out. And that's when I noticed, people were watching. A couple down the aisle glanced over as I corrected him. Another woman looked away quickly when our eyes met. Mark noticed it too. His ears turned red. For the first time in his life, he was the one being lectured in public. By the time we checked out, his jaw was tight, and he barely looked at me. But the total came to just under $70 for a full week's worth of food. I held up the receipt. See? This is how you actually manage money. He didn't reply, just shoved the bags into the trunk of his car. And for the first time, I felt the scales tipping fully in my favor. After that first grocery trip, things shifted. Mark stopped pretending he was in control of anything. He still carried the stiffness of a man whose pride had been cracked, but he kept showing up, which told me just how desperate he really was. The deal was simple. Every Sunday, he came to my apartment with his bills, receipts, and pay stubs from the odd jobs he'd picked up. And every Sunday, I sat across from him at my kitchen table like a teacher reviewing a failing student's homework. "Why did you spend $30 on takeout?" I asked one week, tapping the receipt. He groaned. "It was just one time, Cindy." I was exhausted. "No," I cut in firmly. "You don't get to make excuses. You're 2 months behind on rent, and you're still buying takeout. That's not exhaustion, that's bad planning." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He just scribbled down what I told him to. The next week, I spotted a streaming service subscription on his statement. "You can't afford Netflix right now. Cancel it." "Seriously? It's only $10 a month." "And that's $10 you don't have," I snapped. "Cancel it." He stared at me for a long moment, then finally nodded. "Fine." Little by little, the arrogance melted away. He stopped rolling his eyes at my corrections. He stopped arguing as much. Instead, he listened, quietly taking notes, as if he knew deep down that this was his only way out. One Sunday, as we wrapped up, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "You know, I used to think I had everything figured out. That I was smarter than everyone else when it came to money." He glanced at me, shame written all over his face. Turns out, I didn't know a damn thing. I didn't smile. I didn't reassure him. I just said, "No, you didn't." Because this wasn't about comfort. This was about repayment, not in dollars, but in humility. And the more he came back, the more he gave it to me. It was late on a Sunday evening when it finally happened. Mark had come over like usual, folder in hand, his face tired from another week of scraping by. I could tell he hated this routine, hated sitting across from his younger sister while she dissected every mistake he'd made. But he kept coming, and that told me he needed me more than his pride could handle. That night, we went through his expenses as usual. He had done better this week, no takeout, no unnecessary purchases, and his bills were paid on time. For the first time, his numbers weren't a complete disaster. "Not bad," I said, flipping through the papers. "You're finally starting to get it." He gave a small nod, but instead of his usual defensive muttering, he just sat there, staring at the table. The silence stretched, heavy and awkward. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, almost shaky. "Cindy. I need to say something." I looked up, curious. "Go on." He rubbed his hands together, like he was trying to find the courage. "Back when you asked me for help, when you were struggling. I remember how I laughed. I remember what I said. And I've been thinking about it a lot lately." His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw a real vulnerability in him. "I was cruel. You came to me when you had nothing, and I made you feel small. I'll never forgive myself for that." For a moment, I just stared at him. This was the same man who once strutted around like he had all the answers, the same brother who dismissed me like I was a child. Now he was sitting across from me, broken down, admitting he was wrong. The satisfaction was sharp and sweet. But at the same time, I felt something else stirring in me, something softer. "You're right," I said firmly. "You were cruel. You could have helped me, but you didn't. And I'll never forget how that felt." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I don't expect you to. I just needed you to know I regret it. More than anything." For the first time since this all started, I let the silence sit without pressing it. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, and simply said, "Good." Because finally, after years of carrying that memory like a scar, I had the acknowledgement I deserved. After that night, something shifted between us. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but the air felt different. Mark had finally said the words I'd been waiting years to hear, and for the first time, I could see the weight of his guilt pressing down on him. He wasn't just desperate for money anymore. He was desperate for redemption. The following Sunday, when he came over with his folder, I noticed his attitude was different. No sighs, no eye rolls, no quiet resentment radiating from across the table. Instead, he sat down, laid everything out neatly, and even said, "I canceled that last subscription you pointed out. And I cooked all week instead of ordering in." I raised an eyebrow, flipping through his receipts. "Good. That's progress." He gave a small nod, almost like he was proud of himself. For once, it wasn't just me dragging him along, he was actually starting to try. Over the next few weeks, I loosened the leash, just a little. Instead of scrutinizing every penny, I started teaching him strategies: how to meal prep, how to negotiate with creditors, how to build a simple budget he could actually stick to. And the strange thing? He listened. Really listened. One Sunday, while we were at the grocery store, he stopped me in the aisle. "You know, I used to think this kind of shopping was beneath me. Buying off brands, comparing prices. I thought it was for people who didn't know any better." He paused, holding up 2 cans of beans, one name brand and one generic. "But I was the one who didn't know better." "You were right." I stared at him for a long moment, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. It wasn't the kind of hollow admission he used to toss out to shut people up. It was real. I didn't say much in response, just a simple, "Glad you're finally seeing it." But inside, I felt something I hadn't expected: pride. Not for him, but for me. I had taken the humiliation he once dealt me and turned it into power. And now, I was shaping him into someone better than he'd ever been before. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something different, something on my terms. And I wasn't about to let him forget who had put him there. By spring, things were starting to look different for Mark. He'd managed to pick up steady part-time work at a warehouse while still searching for something full-time. His bills were no longer drowning him, and for the first time since he'd lost his job, he wasn't living in constant panic. But the biggest change wasn't in his finances. It was in him. One Sunday, when he came over for our usual budget session, I noticed something new in his folder: a notebook, carefully organized, with his expenses broken down week by week. He slid it across the table toward me. "I started keeping track on my own," he said quietly. "Didn't want you to have to hold my hand every time. Figured, it was about time I started taking responsibility." I flipped through the pages, surprised at how detailed they were. For a man who once sneered at budgeting, he had put in real effort. "This is actually good," I admitted, glancing up at him. "You're finally starting to get it." He gave a small smile, not cocky, not smug, just humble. "That's because of you, Cindy. You didn't just bail me out. You made me learn." The words hit me harder than I expected. For years, I'd carried resentment like a shield, replaying his cruelty over and over. But hearing him say that, admitting that I had been the one to pull him out of the hole, it was like the balance had finally tipped in my favor once and for all. A week later, he did something that stunned me even more. When we finished grocery shopping, I reached for my wallet at the checkout. But before I could pay, Mark stepped in front of me and handed the cashier his debit card. I raised an eyebrow. "What are you doing?" He shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You've covered my groceries for weeks. This one's on me. I can afford it now." It wasn't much, just $70. But the gesture carried more weight than he probably realized. For the first time, he wasn't just taking from me. He was giving back. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years, the beginnings of forgiveness. By the time summer rolled around, the man sitting across my kitchen table wasn't the same brother who once laughed at me through the phone. Mark had finally landed a new full-time job, nothing glamorous, just a steady office position with decent pay and benefits. He was still climbing out of debt, but he was doing it with discipline instead of denial. One evening, after going through his numbers, I leaned back in my chair and studied him. He looked healthier. Calmer. His clothes were neat again, his posture stronger. But more than that, there was no arrogance in his voice anymore. Just humility. "You've come a long way," I said slowly, almost surprised by my own words. "I'll admit, I didn't think you'd stick it out." He met my eyes, no smirk, no defensiveness. "I wouldn't have, if it wasn't for you." The sincerity in his tone caught me off guard. "I was awful to you back then," he continued. "I thought I was better than everyone else, and when you needed me most, I failed you. I don't expect you to forget that. But I want you to know. I'll never treat you that way again. You've taught me more than I ever deserved to learn." For a long moment, I just sat there, quiet. Part of me wanted to hold on to the anger, to keep the power I had gained by making him feel the way he once made me feel. But another part of me, the stronger part now, realized I didn't need revenge anymore. I had already won. I had pulled myself out of the hole without him. I had built a life, stability, and strength on my own. And when he fell into the same hole, I had been the one to pull him out. The balance wasn't just even now. It was tilted in my favor. I gave him a small nod. "Good. Because I won't ever let you forget what that felt like. But I think we can move forward." For the first time, I saw relief in his eyes, not the desperation I'd grown used to, but genuine relief. And in that moment, I realized my revenge was complete. It was a warm September evening when I realized the chapter had finally closed. Mark and I had just finished dinner at my apartment, nothing fancy, just pasta and salad, but it was the first time in years that we sat together without the weight of tension between us. No lectures, no budgeting sessions, no unspoken resentment simmering beneath the surface. Just two siblings sharing a meal. After we cleared the table, Mark leaned against the counter and looked at me. "You know," he said, "when I lost everything, you could have turned your back on me. And I wouldn't have blamed you. I probably deserved it. But you didn't. You helped me. And I'll never forget that." I studied him for a moment, and for the first time, I didn't see the arrogant older brother who once laughed at my struggles. I saw a man who had been broken down, humbled, and rebuilt, not just by life, but by me. "You're right," I said softly. "You did deserve to know what it feels like to be turned away. And for a while, I wanted you to suffer. I wanted you to feel every ounce of what I felt back then." He nodded slowly, not arguing, not defensive. "But," I continued, holding on to that anger, "it doesn't serve me anymore. I've already won, Mark. I proved I could make it without you. And when you needed someone, you came to me. That's all the justice I needed." For the first time in years, I felt light. Truly light. Like I had set down a burden I didn't even realize I'd been carrying all this time. We talked a little longer that night, about work, about life, even about old memories. When he left, he hugged me, not the awkward, obligatory hug from family gatherings, but a real one. And for once, I didn't pull away. As I closed the door behind him, I smiled to myself. The girl who once cried over an empty fridge was gone. In her place stood a woman who had built her own strength, taken back her power, and taught her brother a lesson he'd never forget. Revenge hadn't come from cruelty. It had come from patience, discipline, and finally forcing him to face the mirror he'd avoided for so long. And in the end, it left me with something I never thought I'd have: peace.